Greetings, horror fans, and welcome back to Horror Game Wars, the new Halloween event hosted by yours truly, Mr. Rage22. In the last episode of the Halloween event Horror Game Wars, we covered Visage, the game that is currently going up against Outlast in the very first episode of Horror Game Wars, Outlast versus Visage. In the previous episode, we analyzed Visage's gameplay and scare factor, and the end result was a 3-point for each aspect, gameplay and scare factor, putting Visage in the lead of 6 points so far. Visage only needs a couple more points to get to 10, and even if it gets a couple of bonus points, it'll most likely win. Or will it? Outlast is no slag when it comes to horror. I have judged this game pretty harshly in the past. I've even made a full-on review talking about why I thought Outlast was overrated, and I still think it's overrated. My opinion hasn't changed. But here's the thing. I've said this in my video talking about why GTA 5 is overrated. Every time on this channel I say a game is overrated, that does not mean I hate it, and it does not mean I think it is a bad game. I just think it gets a little too much praise for its own good. If you give a game all that praise and someone plays that game thinking it's good from hearing all that praise you gave it, and then they might end up being disappointed, like, why would you want that, So, yeah. Anyways, enough with that. We are not here to judge Outlast. We didn't judge Visage. We talked about its benefits. We talked about some of the things it done good, some of the things it done bad. And also, one thing I want to say about this event, or the Horror Game Wars. Obviously, in order for a game to score more points, it has to do more good than bad. If it does more good than bad, it'll get more points. If it does more bad than good, it'll get less points. Pretty obvious, but just to put that out there. But, yeah. Anyways, guys, let's get straight into the horrifying world of Outlast. So, first things first, obviously, the gameplay. Now, when it comes to the gameplay, Outlast is somewhat similar to its opponent Visage. Only difference being is Outlast is a lot more fast-paced, and if you are someone who likes fast-paced horror games, horror games that just get right up in your face and just, take things really fast, then you're probably going to like Outlast a lot more than Visage. Also, guys, like I said, this event and this horror game war thing, everything here is solely based off of my opinions alone, and my opinions are not fact. They are only fact to me because those opinions are personalized for me. They're my own personal opinions that come from my mentally ill lizard brain. So just to let you guys know about all that. Because, you may like this game a whole lot. Outlast might just be your favorite game of all time even. So, yeah, I'm just letting you guys know that. Now, anyways, when it comes to the gameplay of Outlast, the gameplay is a lot more fast-paced than Visage. There is some exploration here and there, but that exploration is not really there for solving puzzles or, searching for key items. I mean, there is some stuff like that here. There is some little exploration here and there, but for the most part, Outlast is a survival horror fast-paced game. There is no puzzles in Outlast. And Outlast actually does something pretty ballsy, especially when you realize that Outlast is based off of Amnesia: The Dark Descent, which had a lot of puzzles. Outlast has little to none. Outlast has no puzzles at all. There is not a single puzzle in this game. But the reason for that is because the gameplay of Outlast focuses more on progression. This is a game where only two things matter: progression and survival. These are the two core gameplay aspects of Outlast gameplay. These are the two gameplay elements that matter most in the gameplay of Outlast. I mean, there's other small little things here and there, like, there's some slight exploration here and there. There is some slight exploration because during the segments where you are completing objectives, and we'll get into the objectives in a bit, but during the segments where you are completing objectives, you do have to, walk around a little bit to actually search for whatever will help you either solve or complete your objective. And the objectives of the game are fairly simple. They're not extremely complicated. Which is ironic, since I talked about how in Visage, people who complained about Visage being too hard because the game was too cryptic, Outlast might actually be the perfect game for you if you are someone who didn't like Visage, ironically, because in my Visage review for the Horror Game Wars, Visage is a very difficult game, but it's not challenging to the point where it feels like it's too much. You know, it's got the right amount of challenge and satisfaction that comes when you actually overcome that challenge, because the puzzles and objectives in Visage, while being very cryptic, Visage gives you a lot of hints. It gives you just the right amount of hints to use your brain to figure it out. Outlast to me is like a more simpler version of what Visage was offering in terms of gameplay, because while Visage had much more challenging puzzles and objectives, Outlast's objectives are very simple. You've got things like, you know, turning a lever or finding like 3 electrical pieces to press a button so you could, you know, open up a gate. You've got segments where you gotta go to like 3 separate rooms to press, you know, 3 buttons so that we could get a generator going on to get the power back on. You know, you've got fairly simple objectives. So if you're someone who doesn't like, you know, if you're someone who's easily frustrated and doesn't really like, you know, figuring a lot of stuff out, then that's going to really satisfy you with Outlast's gameplay, because for the most part, you know, besides the running and hiding aspects, the puzzles, I mean, not the puzzles, the objectives for Outlast are very simple. You know, you're never going to have a point in this game where you are going to have to look up a guide or you feel like you are lost. One thing that makes the objective solving a little better is during most of these segments where you are completing these objectives, you are also being stalked by an enemy. So this gives a couple of points to the scare factor. Because for the most part, these hide and seek segments, which I like to call them, they're all right, you know? I mean, there is tension involved, especially if you're playing on like a harder difficulty, or especially if you don't want to reset for getting killed, because, you know, obviously if you get killed, you got to reset the whole thing and do that objective all over again. It's going to take, you know, precious time and you just don't want to die. So that tension is somewhat there, you know, depending on your own thoughts about, you know, do I want to die and restart, or is it okay and I'll just restart if I die, you know? I mean, and dying is going to be a huge part of the game. You're going to die a lot. But dying is essential, because the more you die, the closer you get to figuring stuff out, you know, because, like, you know, you got to recognize the patterns of the enemies and stuff. One good thing about Outlast, and like, I'm going to say this right now, this one core gameplay aspect of Outlast is what kind of makes it go up a little bit on Visage. I mentioned this in the Visage review of this matchup. The chase sequences in Visage, while not being horrible, they're pretty trash. They are nowhere near as good as the chases in Outlast. This is honestly the star of the game. This is the best part of the game. This is what makes Outlast, is the chasing segments or the stealth sections. You see, one great thing about Outlast's gameplay is I like how it gives you 2 options. If you're someone who likes to play more tactile, then you could, you know, just be more stealthy. You know, you could be more stealthily. You could try and get around the enemies without getting caught and, you know, play it safe. Or you could be cocky and, you know, get yourself a really, really fast adrenaline rush and, you know, just enjoy the chase, because the chases in Outlast are really good. This is what makes Outlast one up on Visage. This gameplay aspect alone makes Outlast better than Visage in a lot of ways, because the chasing in Visage is garbage. Like, seriously, like a lot, like, for example, there's one chasing segment in Visage that is so incredibly frustrating. I died like 7 times, and that wasn't even my fault. There's like this one chase sequence in Visage where there's enemies around every corner, and you gotta find a way to get past them, but there literally isn't any way around them. You gotta, like, it's extremely frustrating. And during Visage, your character in Visage runs like a fat person who also has severe asthma. So the chasing in Visage is garbage. The chasing segments are garbage. So this one core aspect, this one core gameplay aspect from Outlast definitely makes Outlast one up on Visage quite a bit, because the chasing segments in Outlast are very, very fun. There's also a lot of strategy involved with them. You could just choose to try and run to the nearest room where there might be a door or a locker, or you could just run in a straight line. You could just, you could try and, loop the enemies around. You could try and outsmart them. An example I'll show you guys right here of how fun the chasing segments are. Here, I'll show you guys an example right here. So yeah, as you guys can see, that is what I like to call tactical looping. I swear to God, when a Dead by Daylight player plays another horror game. So yeah, there is definitely some strategy involved with the chases in Outlast, and that of course leads to more playstyles, personalized playstyles as well, because you could either be someone who likes to play more stealthily when you play these type of horror games, or you could be an adrenaline junkie who actually enjoys the thought of being chased by a mentally ill sociopath who wants to stick a 2x4 up your asshole. So, yeah, the chase sequences in Outlast are pretty good. There's a lot of strategy involved. There's even dodging. You could even dodge your enemies. I'm not sure if Red Barrels put this in intentionally. It might have just been like a mistake with the gameplay, but yeah, there's a lot of strategy with the chases. You could either just, be more frantic and, just try and get to the nearest safe point, or you could just try and hide, or you could just, do that tactile looping like I just showed you guys there, because you could actually loop the enemies in Outlast pretty hard. All you need is a wide open area, something to vault over, and you can pretty much just fuck with the enemies like all day and night. Just loop those guys for days, bro. So yeah, the chases in Outlast, that already gives the gameplay 1 point. That's already going to give the gameplay 1 point right now. I'm gonna say that gives the game 1 point right now, because the chases in Outlast are pretty damn fun, and there's a lot of them too. So, and I like how different the areas get when you're being chased. Like, for the most part, while you never really go to a place besides the asylum, which is, where Outlast fully takes place in, there's a lot of different areas of the asylum, and each different area kind of has like its own layout, its own like, own little creepy settings, their own little creepy atmospheres. The locations of Mount Massive Asylum also make up for some really good exploration. So Outlast does have decent exploration because of the actual areas of Mount Massive Asylum. The setting that Outlast also takes place in is also really good. I mean, in Insane Asylum, it's cliche as shit, but it's cliche because it's been shown so many times in horror movies, but you put that kind of shit in a horror game, and that already makes for a fantastic setting for a fantastic horror game. So the setting alone makes Outlast pretty damn good. To be honest, guys, I think both of these games are really good. Like, it's kind of hard to compare them when they're both really so good. But this is a war of horror games, a war that I started because I had nothing else to do. God, I need help. Anyways, so yeah, the location of Mount Massive Asylum, it makes up for some good exploration. The exploration of Outlast is like, it may not be as good as it is in games like Resident Evil and Visage, this motherfucker right here, but it's decent, it's decent enough. So with the decent exploration and with the really fun chases, Outlast is a pretty good game. The gameplay is pretty damn good. And the inclusion of a night vision camera is even better. I almost forgot. The inclusion of a night vision camera is pretty damn good. It's something we've never seen in a horror game before. And this is something that Amnesia didn't even have. And to be honest, this is actually kind of something that Visage kind of copied from Outlast, because in Visage, you use a camera yourself. It's just not a night vision camera. But it's used for the same purpose. It's used to give you light, except for in Visage, you have to flash it, and the flashing from the camera gives you light for like a second. So the camera thing in Outlast was actually kind of revolutionary. And it also adds a kind of like resource management, kind of like Resident Evil, because while you are exploring and surviving in Outlast, you are also looking for batteries for your camera to give you light for your camcorder, and that is essential to your survival, because obviously you can't just run around in the fucking dark while you're being chased by some big bulky motherfucker who wants to rip your goddamn head off. So the camera aspect of Outlast is also pretty good. I mean, if you're a fan of found footage films, you're gonna love it even more. So for the most part, the gameplay for Outlast, it's all right. Personally for me, I play Outlast because I enjoy the story, the setting, and the chases. But one thing that I don't like about Outlast is the fact that you are a victim in this game. I don't like the idea of being a victim. I'm not a victim, I'm a fighter. All right? I don't like that being stripped away from me. So if you're someone who thinks it's actually scary that you can't fight back, because, that's one of the reasons why people love this game so much, I guess you'll like that aspect too. But personally for me, I don't. I just don't, I've been playing games like Resident Evil and Dead Space, and I played the hell out of the Evil Within when it first came out. So I'm not really used to games like Outlast's type. I'm not used to games where you can't fight back. Now, I know, This may sound extremely biased coming from someone who really likes Visage, a game where you also can't fight back. But the reason for that is because Visage makes up for that, because Visage has fun and challenging puzzles and objectives. It has fun chapters that make it feel like mini horror games in one, and it is a lot scarier. So, and also not only that, but the ghost. In Visage, there's ghosts chasing you. You can't fight back against ghost. Trying to fight back against a ghost would be like trying to take on a tank or a tornado with your bare hands, being like, damn you, God, you ain't gonna kill me. So, it doesn't make sense to fight back against a ghost, okay? This isn't Fatal Frame, so to be honest, I don't really care about that. And besides, Visage doesn't need you to fight back against the enemies because the game already makes up for it. The reason why this is a problem in Outlast is because I feel kind of frustrated when I get killed by some malnourished prick trying to kill me with a 2x4 when a normal human being would very easily be able to defend themselves against that type of situation. There is a game that is very similar to Outlast called Condemned Criminal Origins, and you could bet your ass that it's going to be on this list, but basically in that game, you get to beat the shit out of Flocka using drug addicts and Bat Salt using drug addicts with a fucking stick or a 2x4. You get to use all these melee weapons, and I'm going to say this right now, that game is already better than Outlast. You see, the problem with Outlast is it doesn't have enough to keep its gameplay interesting. Yes, the locations kind of change, but you never go anywhere besides Mount Massive Asylum. You're trapped in there. I guess that's kind of the point of the game. It's supposed to have that, sense of that claustrophobic sense of being trapped inside of an insane asylum filled with people trying to kill you. But, a lot of the different locations, at the end of the day, they all just feel kind of the same. I think if I can remember, yeah, there was only like one segment where you're outside for like a split second and then you just go right back in. The protagonist even talks about something, how the more he tries to escape, the deeper he gets into the asylum. So even the developers and the protagonist are aware of the fact that you're always inside the asylum. So it gets a little boring every once in a while, it gets kind of boring. Luckily, the chase sequences keep it fresh, I guess. I mean, for the most part, the chase sequences is what makes the game. Obviously, the best part about Outlast is the chase sequences. Outlast is a game of hide and seek and running and vaulting. It's a parkour / hide and seek simulator with horror aspects. That's literally all it is. It's not a real survival horror game like Resident Evil. It's not a game that's incredibly scary like Visage or Madison or Fatal Frame. It's just not that. So for me, I'm going to give the gameplay of Outlast 2 points. And it gets those points because it's got fun chase sequences, which also brings in strategy, and it has a decent scenario with using a camcorder. So yeah, gameplay gets 2 points. Now we're going to be moving on to the scare factor. This is unfortunately where Outlast kind of takes a dive. The scare factor in Outlast is not really good. While Visage may fail when compared to the chase sequences in Outlast, Outlast fails when compared to the horror aspects of Visage. Visage has better horror, Outlast has slightly better gameplay. Okay, that's how it's gonna go. But for the most part, the scare factor in Outlast is not really good. If you are someone who is frightened easily or has a bad reaction to Five Nights at Freddy's type jump scares, then you might as well say Outlast is the scariest game you'll probably ever play, and it may make you shit your pants, maybe not, I don't know. But for me, Outlast was a pretty scary game when I first played it the very first time. It was still somewhat scary the second time I played, but ever since the second time, the game has just really not become that scary for me anymore. And the problem for that is because Outlast uses a very tedious method of scaring the player, and that's just body horror. This was something that people criticized Outlast's sequel for, Outlast 2. They said that Outlast 2 was too edgy because it had all of that disgusting body horror. And yet, in Outlast 1, there is a scene, or there's a scene in this game where you see one of the inmates masturbating on top of a pile of dead bodies. And then in another scene, there's this room you could enter where there's heads stacked up like bottles and a bunch of body parts and blood and guts and shit all over the floor. This game shoves so much body horror down your throat, at that point, it's not even scary anymore. It's just really unnecessarily gross. Like, the only scare factor that this game has that's good is honestly what comes from its story. And also the patience. The patience kind of make the game scary, especially when you realize what they're going through, because Outlast is basically about madness. It's basically about people going mad and people having the last bits of their minds ripped out of their skulls, and now they are just mindless killers. And as someone who struggles with mental illness, this does kind of scare me personally, because I do struggle with mental illness. And that is a lot what Outlast is about. So is Visage, but not in the same way. Outlast's best scare factor would have been so good if its best scare factor would have been the one that was used most, because Outlast does use that same scare factor as Visage with mentally ill stuff and mental illness type topics. Because it literally takes place inside of an insane asylum. It's also very tragic. This is for the story. We're going to say this for the story, but yeah, for the most part, the patients are what make the game scary, because you see the patients doing some pretty spooky and disturbing shit. Outlast is very disturbing at times. Like, when you realize what the patients of Mount Massive Asylum went through and what they are now going through, and you're literally there to witness it all, it is pretty terrifying when you think about it. You know, really, really think about it, especially if you go through mental illness yourself like I do. So that's one thing that I definitely do like about Outlast. Besides that, too much gore, man. Honestly, just too much gore. The gore in Outlast is honestly, it's too much, you know? The game doesn't have that much tension except for when you're being chased or when you're being hunted. That's pretty much where all the tension comes from, but all that tension gets flushed down the drain when you could pretty much just loop the enemies around a small table, or they can't hit you as soon as you jump over like an obstacle or something. So yeah, scare factor in Outlast, it gets 1 point. You get 1 point for the scare factor because, to be honest, besides the whole blood and gore thing, the overused blood and gore, and people said that Outlast 2 was edgy. Jesus Christ. Outlast also has a lot of jump scares. And they work sometimes, you know, they kind of get you off guard sometimes, but other than that, the jump scares are just not that effective. They work more like the ones in Five Nights at Freddy's. To be frankly honest with you, right after the very first jump scare, I'm pretty sure like 1 or 2 got me after that. So, yeah. For the most part, Outlast falls short in terms of both gameplay and scare factor, especially when you realize that the gameplay's only good thing is the chases and, you know, the somewhat strategies that you could use while on them. You know, you could be more stealthy. I do still like that a lot. I like how you could either choose to be stealthy or you could just, you know, if you're an adrenaline junkie, that definitely adds some variety with the game. So, yeah. But scare factor takes a pretty hard fall. Chase sequences and a slightly decent story and atmosphere definitely make up, but yeah, Outlast gets 3 points. In general, game gets 3 points, while Visage got a maximum, or not maximum, but got a hefty amount of 6 points, while Outlast gets 3. So Visage, for now, is still in the lead. So yeah, guys, I hope you enjoyed the second episode of my first, or like the second part of my first episode of Horror Game Wars. The final part will be coming tomorrow, where we will discuss the final aspects of both of these games, which will be the story and the atmosphere, soundtrack, and graphics. Just want to let you guys know, by the way, I'm also working on like a ranking thing for my Horror Game Wars. Let's say a horror game gets most of its points from its scare factor. If a horror game gets most of its points from its scare factor, it'll be put on a list of games that are more scarier than, you know, not, like, or games that rely more on their scare factor than their gameplay. And if a horror game scores a lot of points with its gameplay and its scare factor, which is the two most important aspects, then it'll be classified as a highly good horror game, which will be on a high rank. And it'll be put up against other high rank horror games, because here's the thing. I am not going to put horror games that don't get as much points against horror games that have more points. So for example, like if Visage wins, which it most likely will since it already has 6 points, if Visage wins and Outlast loses, then Outlast will be known or classified to me and on my list as a horror game that's just not that good. Or a horror game that's, you know, kind of good but also not that good. So horror games that are not as good as others will not be put up against other really good horror games. Instead, it'll be put against horror games that are also just not as good, or horror games that get a similar amount of points that it gets from a different matchup. So yeah. And also, I'm still not sure if this is going to be like a Halloween thing only, or if this is actually become a normal thing on my channel. I will definitely consider it, but to be honest, I think this would be better if it was only like a Halloween type thing, you know. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, you know, because I want to kind of have like a Halloween thing to do every year. So, yeah, I'm not entirely sure yet, but this concludes the second part of the first episode of the Halloween Horror Game Wars event, Outlast versus Visage, the dawn of the scariest games of all time. Well, maybe not this one, but this one. Anyways, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. I guess enjoy this last clip that I recorded from Outlast if you want. I basically just bullied the hell out of this inmate. So, yeah. Anyways, you guys have a good one. Dead by Daylight Survivor main in a nutshell. Take care, guys. See you around.